Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen, and welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scot McKay, and I'm your host. You'll find me at Scot McKay on X, on YouTube, just about everywhere except Instagram, where I'm at Real Scot McKay. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com. Hope you'll visit us there, and I definitely hope you'll join us in the Facebook group, which is the Mountaintop Summit. With me is a gentleman I'm just getting to know. He's from Bradford, Pennsylvania, which you're going to need to look up on a map there, north central Pennsylvania, which is actually beautiful country. And he is the founder of Manlyhood, which is a great name and a great website URL to own. And today we're going to talk about a subject that I think might feel uncomfortable at the beginning for a lot of guys, but it's something that I think is also very visceral to us and kind of archetypal. And that's how to fight like hell, how to push back against your own darkness. So without anything further, my new friend Josh Hatcher. How's it going, Josh?
Hey, Scott, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show, man.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure. I'm enjoying getting to know you, and I definitely want to hear more first and foremost about what manlyhood.com is all about. Tell us.
Yeah, so my goal at Manlyhood is helping men to be even better men. I kind of started saying we want to help men become better men, and I realized that the world out there as a whole is telling men that they're not good. And so I kind of rephrased that a little bit because I do think that men are good. And I think we want to help them become even better. And I think just that subtle shift there was important for me because men are leaders in their families, in their homes, in their communities, leaders of themselves. And the ones that are out there that are not good, right? The rapists and the molesters and the thieves and the thugs, those aren't men. Those are boys with bad behaviors. And I think that virtue is a part of what it means to be a man. So yeah, I want to help men become even better men.
You know, we've talked a lot around here about how men have been told by the media and by certain political narratives, et cetera, that they're toxic, that all masculinity is toxic. You know, there was that infamous Gillette commercial about 3 or 4 years ago, which really just confused the bejeebers out of men. And, kind of was the pivotal point in terms of the media generation of this particular falsehood, which is what it is. You know, you're talking about manlyhood. This is falselyhood.
Right.
And what happens is men are told to sit down, shut up, stay in their lanes, at best act more like women, but really we're not given anything to replace our toxic masculinity with. And another thing we talk about sometimes on this show, Josh, is the idea that if masculinity is a completely fluid concept that can be defined as you will, it really ceases to exist. Because if there's no definition to a certain concept, and it can indeed be whatever you fashion it as, it is no longer a concept at all. It's a nothing burger. So I'm really glad that you're dedicated to these particular principles the way we are. And it warms my heart that you're drawing an audience of men who, you know, when they're told to do better, it's not like they needed to be told that. We need to do better, not because someone told us to and we're afraid of being canceled or minimized or something, but simply because in our own character, we're trying to be better men, right?
Right. Exactly. You know, I think that really that individuality, that's the place where it comes, it comes into play because you don't do it to get the girl, right? You don't do it to get the job. You don't do it for any reason other than it's the right thing to do. That's the nature of it being a virtue. And I think that's what we need to embody, that personal responsibility, and make that the core of our, you know, of who we are, make it a part of our identity. Because in the world right now, I think the forces that kind of drive that narrative that men are bad, by the way, I mean, I think, you know, I know that I don't want to get too deep in the weeds politically, but I think
you can feel free.
Yeah, there are some political forces at work, whether or not they are, you know, Democrat or Republican. I mean, I think it's Marxism and critical theory, and it's the Frankfurt School, and it's all these philosophical and political mindsets that want to cause disruption. And I think that's the goal. I think that if you can make people question their identity, then they're easier to be compliant, you know, and if you can undermine the fabric of our society. Western civilization has been built on the nuclear family for generations. I mean, not just generations, it's for centuries. And if you can erode that, then you can control it and build something new. And I think that's what's happening. You can call me a crazy conspiracy theorist if you want. I could consider myself a conspiracy theory enthusiast, which means that I look at what they say, right? And then I dig down into what the truth is that makes people want to believe the craziness. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I know that's kind of into the weeds of our discussion today, but I think that it's important to understand that toxic masculinity, the concept exists, right? You know, toxic behavior from men can exist. Men who bully each other, that's toxic, right? We shouldn't be bullying each other. You know, you shouldn't be bullying women or treating them without respect. That's toxic. That's not masculine behavior. To be a true man and to be masculine is to have virtue and to have honor and to have dignity and to have respect. So toxic masculinity is actually a misnomer, but because they've shoved it in the faces of everybody in every newscast and every program constantly, nobody in the world hears the word masculinity anymore without the word toxic in front of it, and that's a problem.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. And for the record, for the sake of the guys listening, you have not been a consumer of this particular podcast prior to us meeting today, correct?
I have listened to an episode or two, but I'm not an avid listener now. So
okay. Not enough to realize that everything you just described is an absolute lockstep with what we talk about around here in terms of masculinity being threatened by a socio-political agenda for the sake of weakening the nuclear family, for taking the man who provides and protects out of the center from that household. Therefore, it becomes aimless, unprotected, not provided for. And in that vacuum left by the absence of a masculine presence in that family, who comes and takes over? The government, someone else. So really, it is our freedom at stake, not just our masculinity for the sake of itself. When we diminish who we are as men, you know, we're diminishing the power that we have. And when we start to believe we don't matter to our families, we don't matter to our children. Women can raise children without the help of any man. It takes a village to raise a child, et cetera, et cetera. What it does is it wears on our self-esteem, and it's an insidious agenda. Because men do matter. Study after study, peer-reviewed studies show time and again, and we just talked about this in a master class on what works and what doesn't, probably about a month and a half ago, where the studies show clearly, without any dispute whatsoever, that men matter. Children grow up more successful, better adjusted. Boys stay out of jail when there's a man in the house. You see this in every community across all kinds of cultures, across races, across even nations. You see this time and time again, that the nuclear family is the design that works if you want society to continue on an upward trajectory of growth and character building, because the future generation depends on us as dads. So you're right on target. You're absolutely right on target. And I'm so glad you mentioned everything you did. And no, it's not a conspiracy theory. As a matter of fact, I challenge you, Josh, when we have to kind of apologize for feeling that way and saying those words out loud, it just shows that, you know, even we've been affected and we're supposed to be the pundits. That's how deep this rabbit hole goes. Men are supposed to be men. Women still want a good man, don't they? And, you know, our kids, their livelihoods, their future depends on us, doesn't it? Not on the next political candidate who wins or loses.
100%. And not to play that victim role of, oh, they're out to get men.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, all you have to do is look at what's happening. I mean, for the past, 30 years, compare the television programs from the 50s, right? And how men were portrayed versus how they were portrayed from the late 70s, from Archie Bunker on, and now the male archetype is the dope, the Homer Simpson versus, Beaver's dad, Ward Cleaver. We've come from that strong, hardworking, loving father who was a disciplinarian, but also kind and gentle, right? Those are good traits in a father and a man. And we went from that to seeing men who were just lazy and stupid and unrespectable, and so we've just created this mess culturally because that's the goal. I'm a person of faith, so I actually think that while I say I'm identifying the social political agenda, I think there may actually be even a spiritual agenda to make that happen. But regardless,
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, regardless of all of that, the responsibility to make a difference starts with me. I actually am the kind of guy that I look at it and I say, if we want to make a change, we need to start now, but we're not going to see a change in our generation. It's going to be a generation or two later when things really start to change. So we need to take the time to invest in our children and the young people in our communities and model what it means to be a man so that is there for them when they need it.
Do you think that we're going through the proverbial good times that create weak men? Or have the weak men already created bad times?
Oh, for sure. The weak men have created bad times. And I think that cycle is kind of like, it's more like a fractal, right? Because it's constantly revolving and then spinning off of itself. It's not quite as simple as just a one-tiered cycle. I think it just keeps going and it goes in multiple directions at multiple times. And different fragments of culture get it right while the other fragments of the culture get it wrong. And yeah, but I do think overall we're starting, I think we're in those hard times and I think it will get better, but I think we've got maybe another generation or two away from that happening.
Well, to use your own vernacular then, that's reason why we need to start fighting like hell.
Right.
To be strong men, because there is something to fight for. And history has repeated itself over and over again in the aforementioned cycle, right? Of strength and weakness, that we as men, if we choose to stand up and fight like hell for masculinity and all the trappings that go with it, the nuclear family, our children, our future, our nation, our God, then we have to kind of almost have blind faith in a way that we're going to bring about good times again. So is that kind of part of your foundational reason why you're so passionate about the message of us as men fighting like hell against the darkness?
So kind of.
Okay.
and
I didn't mean to presume anything upon you.
No,
I want
it's all good.
I meant it sort of as a segue. So definitely go ahead and unpack all of it for us, Josh.
Yeah, I do think obviously culturally we have to fight against the external darkness that's out there, right? But I think that we often get too fixated on those things, the broken things in the culture that you really like. You are not going to change Hollywood's mind. You're not going to change big tech. You're not going to change Washington, D.C. And you can think that your vote or your canceling of your Netflix subscription is going to make a difference, but it's not. You're a drop in their bucket. That's all that it is. However, years ago, this was about during the 2016 election when it was going on. And Trump was running against Hillary and the entire world was just at each other's throats, right? You remember that time? It was just like,
how could I forget?
Yeah.
I would argue it's still going on, but
it still is going on. But it was really getting to me because I had friends who were liberal and I had friends who were conservative. And then I had friends who were maybe they were conservative, but they didn't like Trump or they didn't like the things that he was saying, or maybe they were liberal, but they didn't like Hillary Clinton. Either way, everybody was just at each other's throats. And it was miserable for me because I'm kind of a peacemaker in terms of my personality. And I don't mean that in the wounded way where I have to have everybody at peace. I just like to find common ground, right? Like I like to be able to see people work together and nobody was having any peace with each other.
Well, sometimes it takes masculine strength to be that peacemaker. And we've talked about that on this very show. So you're definitely on the right track. Continue.
Right. And, it does take masculine strength to stick them in the get along shirt and make them sit down and work it out,
Stick them in the get along shirt.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the get along shirt where your kids are fighting and then you get one big shirt that's bigger than both of them and you make them wear the same shirt so they have to get along?
I'll be darned. I have seen that, but it's been a while. I'm going to steal that. It's kind of funny.
If you don't behave yourself, I'm going to make you wear the get along shirt. So
I've seen the underwear version of that for a completely different purpose.
Yeah, no, I don't know that I've seen that. Maybe you should stay away from that part of the web.
Well, I mean, if you're consenting adults, right? It's just one trip to Spencer's Gifts away for both of you. I think they were called Fundies. Fundies. Man, probably sounding as if I'm incriminating myself, but I probably bought as many pairs of those as I have of the edible underwear that were made of fruit roll-ups back in the day. And I didn't buy those because, first of all, I didn't trust the food source, and second of all, they just sounded sticky. Yeah. So, it's a big fat nothing burger. It's a 0 for how many pairs of either I've bought. But now that I've thoroughly hijacked your conversation, I invite you to continue on, how people were starting not to get along, maybe if they were friends back in the day, and how that's affecting us in general, because I think that's where you're going. Yeah. And you were right on to something. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and it really bothered me. I got to the place where it was causing me a little bit of mental distress. I mean, I was really struggling with it, and I remember talking about it, and then my crazy hippie friend from Nashville who played in a band, I met him at this weird hippie festival thing that I happened to go to cover for the newspaper.
All of us have that guy in our life, and we all need that guy in our life.
Yeah, and he was just like, hey, man, just plant your garden and take care of your kids and help your neighbor and mow your own grass, man.
Grow where you're planted, saith Mother Teresa.
Yeah. And he was just like pointing out the fact that, like, can you do anything about that? Can you change that? No. So focus on what you can change. Focus on your sphere of influence and make that better. And that really helped me. I think I remembered it all the way up until 2020 when the world got even crazier. But the point, though, I guess, is that all of that really is that personal place that we need to come to, where we're focusing on ourselves and the people around us and the people in our sphere of influence. That is really where the difference is made. I mean, if every one of your listeners made it a point to go out and help their neighbor, think of how many people that would impact. That's a lot of households. That's a lot of neighborhoods that are changed, even if it's in a small way. If each of us get married and have, 3 or 4 kids, and we teach those kids the right way to go, you have 4 kids and 3 of them make it make it through and live the right direction. If you have one rebel, you have one rebel, but you do that. And then you've because the other side that wants death and destruction, they also don't want kids. So we'll get that change in a couple generations. So,
well, the pressure on the masculinity and the nuclear family is also the pressure on the birth rate for some reason. Those go hand in glove. Yeah. We've talked about that at length. Continue.
Yeah. But my point, though, when it comes to the fight like hell, because this is the thing, if you want to be the man that you need to be, it's your own darkness that's going to hold you back, your own failures and your own flaws. And I don't care who you are. I don't care how tough you think you are. If you really sit down, that's the reason why we can't sit alone in the quiet anymore, why we have to have our phones and why we have to have, the television going, why we have to listen to music, and because we don't really want to face the mess that we've made in our lives and the parts of us that are broken, the wounds that we carry from childhood and everything else. And those are the things that if we let them fester, they turn us into the thing we hate the most. And we start making decisions we don't want to make. And we every one of us, I don't care how great you think you are, every one of us is capable of horrible things. And we have got to get that tamed.
Before we do this deep dive into darkness, how's that for alliteration? You brought up something. You were talking about how we've kind of abandoned individualism in general in this country and taken responsibility for our own actions. And I'm coming to a bit of a conclusion based on how you brought this up and how you worded it, and specifically the way you described it. We've kind of skirted around this issue of people not thinking for themselves, becoming sheep. We've also talked about how since COVID in particular, people have lacked self-awareness. I mean, they just do more stupid things while driving. I mean, people like back up into you, not looking where they're going in a crowd. And it never used to be that way. And, since you put it in context with the media, and specifically, I would say social media, how about this, Josh? I think we've gotten so accustomed to having social media think for us and getting in our own echo chamber and looking for and seeking the approval of other people who think like us in order to feel validated at all, that, and here it is, we've traded in our individual minds for this hive mind. It's almost like we've become automated in a way. I know another conspiracy theory-ish kind of thing to talk about. I mean, you and I apparently wear the same brand of tinfoil hat. But I mean, if people who are independent, critical thinkers are coming up with these conclusions independently of each other, there might be something to it. So step one, as we've said here on the show, is get off of your damn computer, get your nose out of your smartphone, go actually talk to some real human beings. First thing you're going to notice is most of us aren't mad at each other. We just want to live our lives and be happy. And we've said that on this show time and again, so I'm saying it, to bring you in on that conversation. Because, man, I totally get everything you're saying. So how does that intersect with this idea of men and their darkness? Because I'll tell you, yes, we all have the ability to be toxic, but that's if our masculinity is misdirected or misused or misappropriated. All of us need to know how to provide, protect. Some would say be a little bit dangerous if we have to be, and most of us are milquetoasts and wusses and mama's boys in today's culture, and the women can't even recognize men anymore. But we've kind of always talked about around here the idea of your dark side being not necessarily that which is evil about you, but that which is unpleasant, the things you have to do, the thoughts you have to have, the discomfort you have to experience as a man to do what you've got to do in this life that you just can't leave up to the women. But you're taking this a step further and saying, hey, you know what? You need to dive a little deeper there, bud, because there's something in you that will bite you, poison you, and indeed become potentially toxic if you're weak enough to let it. Is that what you're getting at? And if so, describe.
So I think there might be two kinds of darkness, if based off of what you said.
Fair enough.
You've got the darkness that you're describing there almost sounds like strength and willingness to do something that somebody else might not be willing to do, like to be, a shepherd or a sheepdog that's willing to take out a threat, Yeah,
I mean, season 1, episode 1 of Yellowstone, first 5 minutes of the show, he has to shoot the horse in the head and kill it because of the car accident.
Right. And that seems dark on the surface, right? But I don't know that that's dark. I think that's noble, right? I was at the grocery store a couple years ago, and I leave the grocery store, and there's a guy who's kind of coming out behind me with 2 or 3 kids and probably a girlfriend rather than a wife, based off the way he was behaving. He wasn't making the kind of commitment, and if he wasn't handling it very well, and he was just being a jerk and screaming at his kids and screaming at his wife and cussing
in public,
like in the Walmart parking lot. And
that explains a lot.
She was afraid. Those kids were afraid, and everybody was like, you could see it. And he just kept going. Like, it's one thing. Okay, I've got to snap and get everybody's attention and tell them it's time to behave, right? Knock it off, kids, right? You get firm. That's one thing. Or even sometimes your wife is out of line and you have to say, look, we're not going to have this conversation right now. And you're a little bit gruff. You know what I mean? You're respectful, but maybe a little gruff. Maybe even too far. This was like, I was concerned that he was about to raise his hand, right?
What's the difference between those two guys? This guy who's doing everything wrong, who you're describing anecdotally, and the guy who is firm, and the guy who can be a little gruff or even unpleasant, not even nice, in quotes, right? Air quotes. What's the difference between those two guys? What does one lack that the other one has? Why is one not all right and one is all right? Go ahead and tell me.
First of all, it's probably self-control, and it's also probably a lack of a father figure in his life teaching him how to behave.
Well, yeah, pragmatically speaking, but what is the functional difference between those guys?
The functional difference,
family situation.
The functional difference is that, there's a definite line. It's really abuse when you go too far, and he was being verbally abusive.
Yeah,
and he was, it had gone beyond that. Hey, I'm upset and I'm expressing emotions and I might be a little bit on the edge of control. He was out of control. So I just walked nearby and I stood where he could see that I was walking towards him. And I just stood there, crossed my arms and stared at him. And I'm a big guy, I'm 6'3" and I'm a lot of pounds and I'm intimidating. And I have that fire in my eyes that I learned from my father. And I just stared him down, and he, like in the middle of a sentence, just stopped talking.
Because he's a coward.
Right. I had no intention of punching the guy in the face, but I'm willing to punch the guy in the face if he would have raised his hand to her.
Let me go ahead and stop you there and give my 2 cents, because you're bringing up such great points and great examples. Scared men don't even know how to create safety for themselves. And if there's any drum we've beaten on this show time and time again, if there's any soapbox that stands higher than the rest of them around here, is the absolute necessity for men to be the providers of safety and security for those they love. It makes women horny. It keeps them attracted. It is the secret to masculinity. Your purpose as a man, as a male human being, as a masculine person, is to create an environment of safety and security where everybody feels safe and provided for. Those are the guys who get women. Now, somehow this poor lady was duped to believe he was at least partially that guy when they got together, and then his true colors came out. But I think the puzzle piece that's being added to this picture here is that he's scared. Therefore, he has to flex against his own wife and kids. And then when a guy who knows what he's doing, knows his way around this concept, stares him down, he runs away.
Well, actually,
he's afraid.
I'm glad that he was afraid. I'm glad that it stopped him.
Well, in his case, specifically, yes.
Yeah, I mean, he probably went home and still did more of the same because he was showing his character. His character was coming out. So if he would have hurt her physically, I would have stepped over and done what needed to be done to protect her and those kids.
Makes sense, because he's not doing it.
Right. I would protect her from him. Even though I don't know her, that's the kind of person that I want to be, and the kind of person I think I am is I protect the people around me. Even the ones that I don't know, even strangers at Walmart. And honestly, I would have even protected him from himself because, if he would have raised his hand and I would have put him down before he hurt her, okay, that's great. But my point is so that's not darkness, that's nobility. To stand up to evil, right?
Okay, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And I think that's all fair. The other side to this, from the perspective I was bringing, kind of adding to what you said, is that, okay, on one hand, you have this guy who's scared and feels like he's got to kind of bully his own wife and kids and make them feel unsafe because of fundamental lack of understanding of how this works. But remember, we were also talking about this guy who can keep control of his family. Tell everybody to pipe down, raise his voice when he has to, even mete out punishment when he has to. But the crazy thing about that is when it's done in the best interest of those you love and done by a man who clearly understands the concept of masculinity and provision and protection, and he's doing it for the right reasons, that too is exactly the sort of thing that makes a woman feel attracted and feel horny. Because see, he's capable. He's capable of having a plan. He's capable of restoring order when it's not there. He brings order out of chaos in general. So because he doesn't let the family get out of hand, he's even more of a provider and a protector. There's not this selfish, fear-based motive for his childish, anti-masculine anger and bullying. Instead, when he raises his voice, it's because there's a purpose, and that's to keep order and to show his family that he loves them and cares about them. And a lot of guys, they really have a hard time seeing that line between those two persona, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that's just because most of the time nobody's ever showed it to them. I think that
Agreed.
While I do tend to look back romantically at the good old days, right? I also know that in the good old days, men also were not able to really talk about how they felt or what was going on the inside. Ward Cleaver was probably a World War II vet who probably saw some crap, and I can imagine that when nobody was looking, Ward had a hard time and had a struggle, and maybe he had to have a shot of whiskey at the end of the night to settle himself down, right? And so I guess my point, though, is that no matter who you are and where you're at and no matter what's going on, there's going to be stuff that we've got to sort out if we want to be who we need to be. And so the guy who is doing his best to keep his family in line and to restore order, if he is not right on the inside, if his wounds haven't been healed, if he hasn't worked through the nonsense, if he hasn't worked through the toxic thoughts in his own mind, then he gets out of control. He reacts in fear, right? He reacts in anger. He's reactive just in general, rather than proactive, and rather than being protective of his family, rather than loving his family, he's being disrespectful to his family. And he doesn't realize that it's coming from that place of brokenness. And that's the thing, man. I think everybody to some degree is broken. And I think that the hardest thing for us to admit is that we are often powerless to fix it ourselves, and that we need some help, whether that's professional help, whether that's a buddy to talk it through, or whether that's even just some quiet time to work through it, you know?
So Josh, how do we fight through this fear, take a stand, reach into ourselves, gain visibility into ourselves as men, and figure out what is dark about ourselves, confront it, and make the change? What's your process for that?
Scott, in my own life, I'm still working on it. And I think most of us are, or we're trying to, if we're willing to admit it. I had this conversation with my wife recently where she was telling me she wanted to be more intimate with me. And, when I hear the word intimacy, I'm thinking getting it on. And I think that's like part of it. But, she was basically telling me she wanted to see my heart. Right. Well, when I finally opened up and told her what I was feeling, she didn't want anything to do with me that day. She was scared. And I think that's a very common occurrence, where it's almost a paradox in a relationship, where if you want to be close with her, she does need to see and know how you feel. But if how you feel is a mess, what you really need to do is you need to recognize that she can probably help you with some of that, but she can't help you with all of that. It's back to that idea of personal responsibility. I find myself all the time not being honest and lying to myself. You talked about that. How do we confront it? It starts with being honest with yourself and telling yourself the truth. If you're sitting there watching Pornhub at night and you're telling yourself that there's nothing wrong with it, there really is. You're contributing to human trafficking. You're contributing to hurting women who may or may not want to, oftentimes don't want to be a part of what's happening there. And you are contributing to the harm in society by doing that. You need to be real with yourself, and you need to say, this is wrong and I shouldn't be doing it. If you're treating, my problem, man, is food. Like, I find myself feeling feelings that I don't want to feel, and then I'll go shove a candy bar in it to make it feel better. And it feels better for an hour or two, but then everything else hurts when the inflammation from all the sugar kicks in, right? Like, I've got to get down to the root and the core of it. Scott, 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused by the time they're 18 years old.
Boys.
Those are boys.
Yes.
Those are the ones that talk about it enough that it can be counted. So that means 1 out of every 5 of your listeners has that in their past.
Along with their host.
And
which I've documented on this show.
Hey, me too, man. And
yep. Where's the Me Too movement for us as guys? We were told to sit down and shut up when we joined in, remember?
Yeah.
This was for women. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of harks back to the whole problem with masculinity being toxic, and not to go down a different rabbit hole, but you mentioned pedophilia. It's amazing how little attention the whole Epstein case and now the release of the list has gotten. Because on one hand, they want us to stop being masculine, but on the other hand, that's allowed, you know? So when indeed you start buying into this hive mind out there, as you lose yourself, your own ability to think critically, you find yourself buying into things that you never would have bought into back when you were thinking for yourself. You know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, man. And I guess that confronting your own darkness comes down to this. It comes down to saying, I just interviewed 2 guys who are personal friends of mine. Usually I'll interview guests that are, best-selling authors, and these are just 2 dudes I know from church. And I'm like, I want to talk to you guys about your story. We talked about their recovery. These guys were hardcore addicts of, they were using heroin and one of them had been Narcan several times. And now they're on the other side of that, and they're talking about drug addiction recovery and alcohol recovery. And I'm like, the stuff you're talking about, man, that could apply to anybody with anything.
Yep.
Those 12 steps, holy cow, they make sense. And the one guy said, there is a recovery program for just about any struggle. So, but I guess that's my point though, is so we talked about, 1 in 5 boys is sexually abused. The number of kids that have abusive homes or absentee parents or all these things, guys, if you are honest with yourself, the things that you have experienced throughout your life, and we haven't even talked about things like PTSD, the PTSD specifically from the military that a lot of guys go through. Every one of us has got some kind of broken, traumatic experience in our life that affects and informs the decisions we make, the worldview that we have, and the way that we see things, and the way that we react to the situations that we're in, because those things start to trigger those defense mechanisms that we've built around those things. And we have to get that stuff sorted out. I say it all the time. You have to deal with your crap or else it'll deal with you. And you can try to shove it down and you can try to pretend like it's not there or like it doesn't bother you. But if it's bothering you, you need to be real. That's the first step. You have to be real about it. And if you need to see a therapist, so what? If you have to take some medicine for a little while to treat the symptoms so you can get better, so what? We could all talk about whether SSRIs work or not. I don't think they do. But, if there's something that helps you, get the help, right? But you can't just change the behavior. You have to change the root of the behavior. Why are you acting the way you're acting? Why are you reacting the way you're reacting? And it comes from somewhere. And we have to be willing to sit down and turn off the noise and get introspective and look at it and then deal with it. And then we have to fight like hell to get better.
Well, we have to get back into our own minds instead of buying into that hive mind again.
Yeah.
That's harder than it may seem on the surface, especially nowadays with the way we've all been trained and the way we've all been conditioned.
Yeah, the conditioning, man, the conditioning will even sometimes echo some of these things that I'm telling you, right? They'll put it out in front of you all the time and make you just kind of pacified, like, it's okay that you're broken. Everybody's broken. No, like everybody's broken and you have to fight like hell to get better. You have to fight to get better. You have to want to get better. Like I know a lot of your listeners are single guys, right? Who are like, I want to mate. I want to find a girl. I need to recover from this divorce. My life is broken now and I got to get better. Stop filling your hole with crap.
Yep.
Because if you just shove crap in there, it's just going to get infected. It's
going to get crappier.
You got to heal. You've got to heal. And I remember a young man that I knew, and he was struggling after breakup after breakup after breakup. And he's like, I'm tired of everybody telling me, that I just need to work on myself, because people would tell him, hey, man, don't worry about finding a girl. Worry on becoming the man that you want to be, and it'll come. Right? It'll come together. You'll find one and you'll be ready for her. And he'd get so mad when people would tell him that. Well, he packed up and he moved to Florida, and then he became the man he needed to be. And then he met a great girl, and now they have 5 children,
Yeah, we call that deserving what you want around here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not gonna find it unless you level yourself up, and start working on it.
A while back in this episode, you alluded to kind of tuning out those things we really don't have control over and focusing on those things within what would be often termed our circle of influence. And, Jocko Willink's company is a sponsor of this show, of course. And in his book, Extreme Ownership, one of the central themes is that there are things you can't control and there are things you can control, and you focus on what you can control, and that will give you the power to feel like you're not a victim anymore, because, you will see real change. If you focus on what the government's doing to me, what literally the entire female gender is doing to me, what, corporate America did to me, even what people in the past did to me who are, now phantoms and ghosts or even dead and gone, what they did to me to harm me, you're allowing yourself to be a victim, because the past you can't change. The future you have control over to some degree, unless, like you said, it's something like who's going to be the next president, how's the economy going, etc. Those things you have no real direct control over. Yet I think part of the hive mind, Jedi mind trick is to dupe us into spending more time on that, thinking we can somehow figure it out. I mean, I see guys on Twitter duking it out with each other, trying to get the upper hand, just spewing hate. And after about 30 seconds, I realized based on the numbers, the metrics of these posts, I'm the only guy paying attention. Right. And so I'll be darned when I have a platform like this podcast if I'm going to get drawn into that kind of mayhem, and join the fray of two guys trying to be the king of the hill between them and each other when no one else is even caring or paying attention. I think it's a misdirection tactic to keep us all from focusing on what's important. Like, for example, our wives, our kids, our futures, our relationships. And so, man, I resonate with everything you've said today, Josh, and I'm so glad you're the man out there giving that message to men. And man, you and I are lockstep on all this stuff. And indeed, gentlemen, you guys listening, the women are waiting for you to become this guy, just like Josh's buddy in Florida had to become that guy. And then the woman he always wanted was there waiting. And, if you start looking at it from the perspective of how long did that woman have to wait for that guy to get his head out of his ass, well, then you start really getting some real perspective on this whole issue. Josh can be found by going to manlyhood.com or by going to mountaintoppodcast.com/Hatcher, HATCHER. And Josh, when they get to that website, what are they going to find, man?
Yeah, you're going to find a link to our private Facebook group for men where, a lot of guys have monetized their communities, and maybe I'd like to do that someday, but it's more about helping right now. I want to help guys. And so, we build each other up there. You're also going to find our podcast episodes, which you can listen to on any podcast platform or on YouTube. And we try to put out 2 episodes a week, and just trying to make a difference, man. That's what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Once again, that's there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com/Hatcher, HATCHER, which is Josh Hatcher's surname, of course. Josh, thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll come back and join us real soon, because I feel like we've really only, scratched the surface of a much larger conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, Scott, I'd be happy to be with you anytime you want me to. So I'm going to hopefully have you on my podcast as well. It'd be a great conversation. So
man, I'd be honored. Let's do that thing. Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell these guys when that happens as well.
Awesome.
So, gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com, get in on the latest master classes. See, here's what I do. Every month I do a deep dive into a very specific area of being a better man and being better with women, and do a whole master class on it. And it's a live event. You guys can interact. You guys can ask the questions. If there's anything you feel like I have left out, you bring it up and it gets covered. We hash out everything like a group of men should. No fluff, just straight to the point. Every month we do a different one. You can check out mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass and get you some. Get all caught up. And also, if you go to mountaintoppodcast.com, be sure to visit our sponsors like the aforementioned Origin in Maine, also Hero Soap Company, and the Keyport. And when you get anything from any of our 3 fine sponsors, please use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 to score yourself an extra 10% off at checkout. And guys, as always, I'm here for you also. If you want to talk about how to be a better man, how to get a better woman in your life, get on my calendar at mountaintoppodcast.com as well. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.